Здравствуйте, welcome to day 104 of Russian Through Poems and Paintings. So we're continuing our review, right? It's a rather exhaustive review of all the basic case forms we learned last year. Again, we have to sort of assume that you know these fairly well moving forward, right? So review these to whatever extent you need to. So we've looked at nouns already. Let's look today at mostly adjectives. By the way, we have a famous painting here. Ivan Grozny, сын его, Ivan, right? Ivan the Terrible and his son Ivan. You see the blood gushing from Ivan's head. This depicts the fact that, well, at least according to legend, Ivan Grozny killed his oldest son, Ivan. And that contributed to the end of his dynasty, right? The Rurik dynasty, Rurikovichi, they're called in Russian. Now, it's kind of a long story, but his another son, Fyodor, was kind of dim-witted and actually ruled for a while, but very ineffectively, and he eventually died fairly soon. And then the third son, Dmitri, was believed to have been murdered. And again, according to legend, that murder is ascribed to the intrigues of Boris Godunov, who eventually assumed the throne during the interregnum, right, which is often called the smutное время, the time of troubles, which was a bad time in Russia. There's a lot we could say about it. But basically, it finally came to an end when a new dynasty began, right? A new Tsar was elected, Mikhail Romanov, right? Romanov, right, or as we say in English, the Romanovs, right? That was the second and final dynasty in the Russian Empire. Okay, so think about the phrase smutное время. Well, there we have a peculiar type of noun, время. Remember, that's a neuter noun despite ending in ya. And we see the adjective smutное. That's a neuter adjective, so that's a good indication that время is indeed neuter, although it may rather confusingly look like a feminine noun, right? So always look for clues from adjectives, and today we're going to review what types of adjectives are there in Russian, and what endings do they take. Okay, first, there's one last thing to revisit with nouns, and we saw this a bit yesterday, right? That in addition to the, somewhat more widespread irregularities for plural nouns like stress, right? Shifting stress and mobile vowels and things like this, we also have some nouns that are just totally irregular, especially in the plural, right? Their plural form is completely unpredictable from the singular form. A lot of those, at least the most common ones, have to do with people. So let's quickly review these irregular nouns referring to people. We had all of these last year. And again, we're going to see that they're weird in the nominative plural, and that weirdness is going to carry over into all the remaining plural case forms. That goes usually for the genitive, and then especially for those other case forms, the three, right, the dative, prepositional, and instrumental, which, as we recalled in yesterday's lesson, are extremely easy. Okay, so let's look some of these over in review. Let's start with сын. The plural is synovya, right? Sons. The nominative plural is synovya. You can tell that that's totally unpredictable. The genitive plural is going to mirror that pretty closely, synovyei. Right? Most of these today are taking yay, these irregular plurals. Okay, now we can follow the pattern and get the remaining case forms very easily. So let's use k, which takes the dative, meaning toward, or in this case, it can mean going to visit these people, or meaning about, and sa, meaning with these people, taking the instrumental. Okay, this should be pretty easy. К сыновьям, о сыновьях, сыновьями. Number two, дочь, plural дочери, genitive plural дочерей. Okay, and somewhat unusually, these forms are going to follow the genitive stress, right? So we get дочери, дочерей, and then our remaining forms are дочерям, о дочерях, and then an unpredictable instrumental, с дочерьми. Right, I should probably have just given that to you in the book, the way I did детьми and людьми, because that's unpredictable. Number three, брат, plural братья, genitive plural братьев. Okay, братьям, о братьях, с братьями. Number four, муж, plural мужья, Genitive plural, muzhey. Okay, we get the picture. К мужам, о мужах, с мужами. Number 5, друг gives друзья, genitive plural, друзей. Note that we're losing the soft sign there. That's a common spelling mistake students make. Okay, the others are going to follow друзья. К друзьям, о друзьях, с друзьями. Number 6, сосед. Okay, the only thing weird about this noun is that it becomes soft all of a sudden in the plural. That's extremely unusual. Okay, so we get соседи, genitive plural, соседей, and now we just need soft endings here. К соседям, о соседях, с соседями. Number 7, ребенок. Okay, here in these final two examples, we get a completely different word, actually. This is called a suppletive form, meaning it was originally a completely different word, but now it's considered the plural of, in this case, ребенок. So children are дети, genitive plural, детей. The other forms are к детям, о детях, and с детьми, which is unpredictable. Number 8, человек, a person, becomes люди, people, людей, к людям, о людях, с людьми. Okay, so that's just some review. Now, again, keep in mind that most nouns don't act like that, right? These are some very unusual nouns that have unexpected changes in the plural. We should just treat them as irregular. Okay, so let's look at some more forms. And for people, right? Let's just review some more basic people nouns. And keep in mind that most nouns like this work regularly, right? There's nothing right, systematically irregular about nouns referring to people. We've just now summarized some that act unusually. But these and 104b are normal. So the main thing is to watch for, first of all, gender and also hard versus soft. Okay, родитель. Okay, what's the nominative plural? Well, we just need soft form. Родители. Родители. Genitive plural. Well, this ends in a soft sign, so we get родителей, right, with yay, that alternate ending. And let's give some random forms. Or, okay, we're going to need prepositional plural. О родителях. Родителях. Number 2, бабушка. Plural is бабушки with an E. Okay, is that soft? Why are we adding E? No, we're adding E because of the so-called 7-letter spelling rule, right? We can't write U after a ka. Genitive plural. Okay, we're going to get zero ending. Would that be babushk? Well, it could be, but we're left with a cluster there, and we can assume that we'll get a mobile vowel to break that up. In this case, well, what will the mobile vowel be? Well, in this case, we couldn't write or because that would be an unstressed or. That would violate the 5-letter spelling rule. Instead, we write yeah, right? And we get babushik. Babushik. Okay, how would we say with our grandmas? С бабушками. С бабушками. Number 3, dedushka, grandpa. Okay, that's a masculine noun, but it has feminine endings. Okay. Grandpas would be dedushki, again writing E because of the 7-letter rule. Genitive plural, dedushik, right, zero ending. And let's say about grandpas, о дедушках, о дедушках. Number 4, внук. Okay, hard masculine, plural is going to be vnuki, E because of the 7-letter spelling rule. Genitive plural, внуков. And let's imagine we're going to visit our grandsons. That would be к внукам. К внукам. Number 5, vnuchka, granddaughter. Vnuchki, E because of the 7-letter spelling rule. Genitive plural, zero ending, mobile vowel, vnuchik. And let's say with our granddaughters, с внучками, с внучками. Okay, number 6, подруга. The plural is going to be подруги. A common mistake is to say подрузья or something, but remember the feminine word for friend, подруга, is not irregular. Right, so подруги, genitive plural, подруг, And let's say with our female friends, с подругами. Number 7, wife, жена. Okay, we can expect the stress to jump backward here. And in fact, here that produces or reveals a so-called latent your, right? So the plural is actually жены. Okay, there we could safely predict that the stress will shift, but we couldn't predict that that would become a your, right? So that's slightly irregular. Жены, genitive plural, жен, and about wives, аженах. Okay, so again, note how that initial irregularity carried over pretty consistently into the other forms. Number 8, невеста. Plural would be невесты, just a hard plural. Genitive plural, невест, zero ending. And let's say we're going to visit our fiancés. I'm not sure why we have more than one of them, but it's just an example. К невестам, к невестам. Okay, a male fiancé, жених. Okay, is there anything weird about this noun? Well, it's masculine, 2 syllables, with the stress on the final syllable, so we could at least guess that it may show shifting stress. Okay, what if I told you that the genitive singular was ženicha? Okay, well, that would give it away. That's going to be an in-stress noun. So the plural is going to be ženichy, genitive plural ženichov, and let's say we're going to visit our fiancés, к женихам, к женихам. Okay, let's tell about the painting of Ivan the Terrible, just filling in some forms for people, right? Some are totally irregular, others regular, so we have to be careful. Let's say Ivan the Terrible had 3 sons. У Ивана Грозного было 3 blank. Okay, see the footnote. We haven't talked about these nouns a whole lot, although we have seen them. They're nouns for groups of people, like a party of 2, a party of 3, or whatever at a restaurant, or telling how many children you have. Those are the most common uses of these forms, двое, трое, четверо, etc., and they take the genitive plural. Okay, so basically we need to say 3 sons, we need genitive plural. That'll be трое сыновей. Трое сыновей. У Ивана Грозного было 3 сыновей. Sin, remember, is irregular. Он сам убил старшего blank Ivana. He himself killed his eldest, the eldest son, Ivan. Он сам убил старшего сына Ivana. Right? Animate accusative looks like the genitive, сына. Number 2, дочь. У царя тоже было 3 дочерей. Right? He also had 3 daughters, дочерей. But all of his daughters died in childhood, right? So all his daughters died. We just need a subject, nominative plural, дочери. Все его дочери умерли в детстве. Number 3, жена. Ivan had many wives, but not all his wives were legal. Okay, bit of gossip there. У Ивана было много. Okay, he had many wives. What case do we need here? Genitive, right? With quantities, including after много, we get genitive expressions. У Ивана было много жен, но не все его жены были законными, right? Not all his wives, right? Не все его жены, right? Были, nominative plural, that's the subject. Number 4, they say that the third son, the Tsarevich Dmitry, and by the way, there was a typo in an older version of this book, Alexeya, right? I don't know what I was thinking when I wrote that. He didn't have a son, Alexei, as far as I know. Maybe he was illegitimate. Okay, but Dmitry, as you were talking about, the Tsarevich Dmitry. Anyway, and by the way, as you see in the footnote in the book, that's why we use this term, the false Dmitri, right? Because later you have these pretenders appearing, claiming to be the rightful heir to the throne, and they say no, Dmitri wasn't murdered; it was set up. He survived miraculously, and here he is, come to claim his rightful throne. Okay. Anyway, so the third son, the Tsarevich Dmitri, убили blank Borisa Godunova. Okay, so what we're trying to say is they say that the third son was killed by the people, so to speak, the men of Boris Godunov. Okay, now note in the Russian that третьего сына царевича Дмитрия is in the accusative, right? It's the direct object of the verb ubili, and so we need a subject for that verb, right? The people of Boris Godunov are said to have killed the third son, the Tsarevich Dmitry. Okay, so let's do the whole sentence. Говорят, что третьего сына царевича Дмитрия убили люди Бориса Годунова, right? There's the nominative plural. Okay, внук, grandson. Так как у Ивана не было blank, okay, that's a non-existence expression, right? Since Ivan had no grandchildren, у него не было внуков, right? Remember we get the genitive in non-existence expressions, right? У него не было, genitive plural, внуков. Его династия закончилась, и Годунов пришел к власти. So because Ivan had no grandchildren and no sons left, his dynasty ended, and Godunov, Boris Godunov, came to power. He took power. If you know the opera Boris Godunov, right, you may know something of this story. Number 6, again, человек. При власти Годунова был великий голод. Pri, as we know, means something literally like in the presence of, and here it's understood temporally, so we could say during the reign, during the power of Godunov, there was the Veliki Golod, the great famine, right? Hence the term time of troubles, right? There were all sorts of troubles besetting Russia during this period. У многих blank не было еды. Okay, another non-existence clause, right? Не было еды, there was no food. So after u, we need genitive plural in this case. Many people had no food. У многих людей не было еды. Number 7, ребенок. According to the version of Pushkin, right, according to Pushkin's version of events, Godunov lost his mind. He went mad when he saw the literally killed by him child in the Kremlin, right? As you know and may know in the opera, right, Boris is haunted by this ghostly child walking around in bloody clothing, right? He's reproaching Boris for ordering his murder, right? And Boris eventually goes mad and dies. Okay, по версии Пушкина, Годунов сошел с ума, когда он увидел убитого им blank. Okay, we need a direct object, right? What did he see? He saw a blank, and then we had this adjective ubitый, meaning murdered, right? He saw a blank murdered by him in the Kremlin. Okay, so the accusative of ребенок is going to be ребенка, ребенка. Okay, so let's finally review adjectives. That's the main point today. We see a famous painting, first of all, неизвестная. How would we translate that? Maybe an unknown woman, right? Note the feminine ending, right? This is a woman who is неизвестная, right? We don't know who she is. An anonymous woman here in the painting. It's a very famous portrait. Okay, let's look. So неизвестный or неизвестная, that's an ordinary hard adjective. As we know, the vast majority of adjectives in Russian are just hard adjectives. Right, so this is the most common paradigm here. Look over these forms. Hopefully, we have to assume that you're more or less familiar with these. Now, remember that for adjectives, there's only one set of plural endings. That's very good news, right? It means we don't have to worry about the gender of the noun, right? If it's plural, we use this one set of plural endings, right? But in the singular, of course, we have to distinguish between masculines, feminines, and neuters. Okay, if you turn the page, you see a quick review of the spelling rules, the dreaded spelling rules, and how two of them affect how we spell adjectival endings. So just to take an example, the adjective хороший, Is that a hard or soft adjective? Well, if we were kind of looking at the spelling, we may say, well, it's a soft adjective. But it's not actually an inherently soft adjective, right? So the only reason we're writing E instead of U is because of the 7-letter spelling rule, and then that adjective is also affected by the 5-letter spelling rule, as we'll see in a moment, right? So adjectives like хороший or even русский, right? Русский. Well, we see the ending и краткое there, but that's not an inherently soft adjective. It's just that in the masculine, the 7-letter spelling rule tells us we have to write E instead of U. But by the way, if we look at the remaining forms like русская, русская, right, it's perfectly clear that this is actually a hard noun. There's nothing inherently soft about the stem. Okay, remember that the 7-letter spelling rule tells us that after the 4 hushing sounds and the 3 velars, we can't write U. Instead, we write E. And the 5-letter spelling rule, which is the most confusing spelling rule, after these 5 letters, the 4 hushings and the 1 odd man out, s, we can't write unstressed o, right? Instead, we write yeah. Okay, if we look over this table of just basic hard adjectives, we see down at the bottom a few examples that are affected by one or both of the spelling rules, right? For example, veliki, right? We see it's affected in the masculine singular and the plural. Because, we're writing e instead of u because of the 7-letter rule. Look at the word adjective for crazy, sumashedshi, kind of like хороший, right? It stem ends in a sh, and for that reason, the 5 and 7-letter spelling rules are affecting the spellings. Okay, but again, if you look over this whole table, you'll see that these examples are somewhat unusual, right? We don't see them constantly, so we should just take special note of them. Now, by the way, I remember also there are a special group of adjectives called in-stressed adjectives, meaning that the stress is always on the ending of the adjective across the board. Now, by the way, that means that in the masculine, look at the black box, we get a totally different ending, namely oi. Oi. Okay, that's characteristic of these in-stressed adjectives, and that ending oi would always be stressed. Okay, yeah, let's just stick with the masculines and go through and get some new vocab. We may not know some of this vocab for describing people. Добрый, intelligentный, which doesn't really mean intelligent. It means generally something more like cultured, someone who's refined, educated, well-behaved, that type of thing generally. Вежливый, умный, мудрый, глупый, талантливый, богатый, бедный, сильный, слабый, известный, красивый, успешный, старый. Now we have великий, which is affected by the 7-letter rule, сумасшедший, affected by the 5 and 7-letter spelling rule, right? Сумасшедший, meaning someone who's lost their mind. We'll learn more about the literal meaning of that, by the way, later in this book. And finally, some in-stressed, злой, дорогой, смешной, молодой. So those are the masculine forms there. We could read through the others as well. Maybe it's kind of a waste of time at this point. Let's read through some feminines. Добрая, интеллигентная, вежливая, умная, etc. Великая, сумасшедшая. And then look at the in-stressed examples. Злая, дорогая, смешная, молодая. Okay, let's fill in some blanks. Again, just watching to make sure our adjective agrees with the noun it's modifying in terms of case, number, right, that is singular or plural, and gender, right? Case, number, gender. We need that kind of agreement between any adjective and whatever noun it's referring to. Okay, so let's say our students are very smart. Наши студенты очень умные, right? Умные, just nominative plural. Number 2, his theory is completely stupid. Okay, его теория совсем глупая, right? Feminine. Number 3, успешный, he founded a successful company, a firma. Okay, here that's in the accusative, so we need, right, feminine, singular accusative, успешную. Он основал успешную фирму. Number 4, красивый. We were strolling around a pretty park, a beautiful park. Okay, по takes the dative. Park is masculine singular here, so we would say по красивому парку. Number 5, бедный. He helps poor people. Okay, look at людям, that's in the plural, and here we're getting the dative because the verb pomagать takes objects in the dative, if you remember from last year. That's somewhat odd maybe, but that's how it works. So we need dative plural ending. Они помогают бедным людям. They help poor people. Now remember, in the plural, we don't have to worry about gender. Right? We see людям is dative plural, and again, we would use the same form no matter what the gender was. Number 6 is известный. I spoke with a famous actor. Okay, с takes the instrumental, so that'll be я поговорил с известным актером. Number 7, великий. We're reading about Catherine the Great. Okay, о Екатерине, that's going to be feminine, singular, prepositional. О Екатерине Великой. Мы читаем о Екатерине Великой. Смешной. He is telling funny anecdotes, right? Funny stories, funny jokes. Okay, that's just going to be a plural, accusative plural, right? We don't have to worry about gender. Он рассказывает смешные анекдоты. And note that смешной is an unstressed adjective, right? Смешные анекдоты. 9, богатый. Это... Sorry, I balked for a moment on the translation. These are the houses of very wealthy people, very rich people. Right? We're on a mansion tour or something. Это дома очень богатых людей. Genitive plural, right? Of very wealthy people. Number 10, молодой. We interact, we socialize, we hang out with young Russians, young Russian people. Мы общаемся с, and of course we know с in the sense of with people, that's going to take the instrumental. С молодыми русскими, right? Two adjectives there used together. Русскими is standing alone as a noun, meaning Russian people. Okay, by the way, for discussion purposes, you could try using a few of the adjectives we just surveyed to describe some of these historical people. Maybe you know a bit about them, maybe you don't. If you don't, maybe look them up on Wikipedia or whatever. I'll just read through their names and tell a bit about who they are. Ivan Grozny was a Ruski Tsar, right? Ivan the Terrible. Pyotr Veliki, Peter the Great, was the Imperator Российской империи, right? So this is already in, right? He helped create the Russian Empire, right? Greatly expanded Russia, built a navy for it, founded a new imperial capital, and so here is where we tend to transition from the old term Tsar to the more formal title Imperator. And of course, it sounds a lot more European. Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy was an известный русский писатель, right, a famous Russian author. Grigory Rasputin was a mystic, and a целитель, a healer. If you don't know much about Rasputin, and especially about his murder, you might want to read up on that. Boris Godunov, as we just learned, was the Ruski Tsar in the time of the смутное время, right, the time of troubles. Екатерина Великая was an императрица Российской империи, right, an empress of the Russian Empire. Anton Pavlovich Chekhov was a писатель и врач, right, a writer and a doctor. And finally, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin, you may remember him from books 1 and 2, right? Коммунист, политик, революционер. Okay, so see what you know. How well can you describe these people? Do you know anything about their biographies, about their personalities, and so forth? Okay, our last topic today is soft adjectives, right? So in terms of adjectives, we have really two major distinctions. Hard adjectives, which are far more common, and then soft adjectives, right, which are very limited in number, actually. Later, I think in book 4, I'll give you a more or less complete list of soft adjectives. That's kind of the best way ultimately to learn them. It's just to learn that it's a fairly limited and set number of adjectives that happen to take the soft endings. It's very useful to point out that most of these adjectives um, have to do with space or time, right? So we're taking some increment of time or some type of space, and we're making an adjective, a related adjective, by adding the soft adjectival ending ni, right? A soft end followed by soft adjectival endings. All right, so if we look over a few of these here in the table, sini, okay, that's a color. That doesn't really fit the time and place, time and space generalization, but let's look at a few others. Последний, летний, зимний, осенний, весенний, сегодняшний, вчерашний, завтрашний, древний. Okay, all of those have to do with time periods, right? So you see how that's a pretty useful distinction. And finally, домашний, having to do with the home, right, kind of a space. And then another one that is kind of unusual, лишний, means extra or superfluous. Okay, so our paradigm here is using синий, the color синий. And if we were to compare this table with the hard adjective table, we would see that across the board here we have simply the soft versions of the hard endings. So these soft adjectival endings really are not unusual or unpredictable at all. They're just a soft version of whatever we saw with the hard adjectives. So, in theory, look over this table and think about what's really going on here. You shouldn't have to sort of memorize this by rote. You just need to understand how we move from hard endings to soft endings. Okay, let's fill in just a few blanks. Let's say do you have an extra shirt or pants? Okay, now here, these things are in the nominative, right? We're saying literally, is an extra shirt or extra pants at you? У тебя есть лишняя рубашка или лишние брюки? Right? Do you have these things? Okay, now note the spelling лишняя, right? Я, and лишние, right? Ie, for that plural брюки, right? Russian брюки, kind of like the English pants, is plural only. Я потерял свой багаж. I've lost my luggage. Number 2, сегодняшний. Have you learned anything interesting from today's newspaper or today's news? Okay, so here we're getting the genitive after is. In the first blank, we have a feminine singular genitive, right? Газета. So that would be is сегодняшней газеты, or from today's news. And новости, right? The news is plural in Russian, is сегодняшних новостей, right? Genitive plural. Number 3, домашний, meaning home, home-related, domestic. I love home cooking, home cuisine or whatever. Remember, кухня can mean the kitchen and also cuisine or cooking. Right? Я люблю домашнюю кухню. Right? You. Note that somewhat peculiar looking spelling. Ресторанная кухня не лучше. Okay, restaurant cooking, or again, eating in restaurants, is no better than home cooking. Okay, what case do we use to make comparisons like this after лучше? Do you remember that from last year? Genitive. Right, so we need a genitive form of домашняя кухня. That would be домашней кухни. Now, since we've just mentioned кухня, right, we don't need to repeat the noun, right? So the best option here would be ресторанная кухня не лучше домашней, right? Meaning, again, literally, restaurant cooking is no better than home cooking, right? Cooking is understood. Number 4, весенний, something spring related, springtime. Мы любим blank солнце и всегда ездим на юг на blank vacation. Okay, the first one, we need a neuter singular accusative, right? Мы любим весеннее солнце. We love the springtime sun. And we always go to the south for our spring break or spring vacation. Now, you may remember from last year that каникулы is a plural only noun, right? It means vacation or break or time off, right? So we need an accusative plural that'll be весенние каникулы. Number 5, древний, ancient. Kiev был центром blank русской цивилизации. So the center of ancient, or we could say medieval, Russian civilization. Okay, so we need the genitive, right? Kiev был центром древней русской цивилизации. That is to say, the center of ancient Russia or medieval Russia. Центр древней Руси. Right now, there we're using the term Rus, which is associated more with pre-Peter the Great, right, pre-imperial Russia, Rus, which is a feminine e noun. And again, by the time of Peter, the more imperial sounding Россия had come into use. Okay, that's enough for today, and that covers the bulk of our review for nouns and adjectives. We still need to review so-called special modifiers, which, as you may remember, act like adjectives, but their endings are somewhat unpredictable. So we're going to cover that as well as pronouns in our next lesson. Until then, до свидания.